کنفرانس واشنگتن. خاورمیانه در حال گذار، چشماندازها برای ایران. مقامات عالی رتبه و کلیدی در دولت‌های بوش، کلینتون و اوباما. 30 بهمن 1389، 19 فوریه 2011. ارتشبد هیو شلتون، رئیس ستاد مشترک ارتش آمریکا 1997-2001، دارای نشان افتخار و مدال طلای خدمات برجسته از کنگره آمریکا، دارای نشان شوالیه از ملکه انگلستان 2001. ارتشبد پیتر پیس، رئیس ستاد مشترک ارتش آمریکا 2005-2007، نایب رئیس ستاد مشترک ارتش 2001-2005. لی همیلتون، رئیس کمیته خارجی کنگره 1993-1995، رئیس کمیته اطلاعات کنگره 1985-1987، نماینده کنگره آمریکا 1965-1999، ریاست مشترک کمیسیون تحقیقات 11 سپتامبر، ریاست مشترک کمیسیون تحقیقات سنا و کنگره آمریکا در مورد ایران گیت، ریاست مشترک گروه سیاست عراق، رئیس مؤسسه دولتی وودرو ویلسون در واشنگتن تا سال 2010.
Good morning and welcome. My name is Bob Torricelli, and for some 20 years I had the great honor of serving in the United States Congress. A rising tide of human expectation and thirst for freedom is now approaching the shores of Iran. What once seemed impossible somehow begins to look inevitable. As students gather tomorrow again in Tehran, it is appropriate, Secretary of State Hillary Clinton. She was heard firmly in Egypt, and now again as demonstrators gather in Tehran to make America's position clear. We do not oppose the government in Tehran simply because they defy America, or even because they have become international outlaws in violating the established laws, but because they betray their own people, because they made a lie and a mockery of their own revolution. Our country has proven that we have high standards for our friends. That is clear after what occurred in Egypt. In the coming days, it is my hope and my belief that President Obama and Secretary Clinton will also make clear that those standards apply to all regimes, the weak and the powerful, our friends and our adversaries. In this struggle, we all have responsibilities. Everyone is ultimately responsible for their own government, no matter their political system. We as Americans have a role, and it is, at a minimum, to correct a great injustice. We all understand the truth. The MEK was placed on a terrorist list as a strategy of appeasement towards Tehran. It failed, and it is time to end it. It isn't simply that it is an injustice. It makes a mockery of the terrorist list itself. Yes, we all have our roles in this struggle. What happened in Egypt will not happen as easily in Tehran. It may be inevitable, but lives will be lost. No one asks us to lose our lives, only to stand up for truth and to correct this injustice. The people of the United States, be they of Iranian extraction or other, have a right to organize and be heard. This sanction on the MEK is interfering with that right. It is giving comfort to the government in Tehran, and it is placing the United States on the wrong side of history. There is time to correct it. The European Union has already corrected this injustice. The United States Court of Appeals has asked for a review. A majority of members of Congress have asked for a change of policy. And in recent weeks, some of the most distinguished military, national security, diplomatic, and political leaders of our generation, Democrats and Republicans, have joined this chorus. It is overwhelming. There was a refrain in the American civil rights movement which comes to mind after all these years of struggle and disappointment and unsuccessful efforts in the past to correct this injustice. It's never too late to do the right thing. For those who have been silent in the past about the government in Tehran, for those who have tolerated this injustice, for those who have played no role at all, this is our moment. We are honored today for this discussion and to bring more light upon this issue, to be joined by a very distinguished panel. It is my honor to introduce each in turn. General Shelton served for 2 terms as principal military advisor to Presidents Clinton and Bush, and served as chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff of the United States. General Shelton spent 38 years serving his country in a variety of command positions. Among his many awards, he was knighted by Queen Elizabeth. He is the author of 2 books. He is a great and a distinguished American, and we're honored to have him today. General Shelton.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Thanks very much. Thank you very much, sir, for your very kind words, and thank you for that very warm reception. It's great to be here with such a distinguished panel, friends that I've had the opportunity to serve with. It's always great for me to be with such a concerned group of citizens that are concerned about their fellow countrymen, people that are concerned about what's going on back in Iran right now, and particularly people that are excited about the potential for change. Now, the subject that I was asked to speak about today, change, is one that is very complex and caused me some concern, because change is always tough. It's hard. It's challenging. It takes difficult work by many, many people. And the factors that I always look at, what's the most effective means to make that change? The most efficient means? What's the least disruptive way that you can do it? And then finally, what's the right timing? And when I look at Iran, I say the timing is now, today. But having been involved in the change of a couple of governments, I can tell you that's the toughest change that you can go through. It is really challenging. The first thing you do is you have to start looking at who's the enemy. And when I do that, I think about the ancient warrior Sun Tzu, who said, and I paraphrase, if you know yourself and you know your enemy, you will be victorious in every encounter. If you know yourself but not your enemy, for every victory you will also suffer a defeat. And if you know neither yourself nor your enemy, then you're a fool and you will be defeated in every encounter. Well, when I look at change in Iran, I think we know who the enemy is. And I'll talk more about that in just a few minutes. But first of all, let me take a quick look at Egypt, because, you know, as a result of recent events there, there's considerable excitement around the world regarding the chance to change. And that's particularly true in the Middle East. And in almost every case, not all, but in most, it is because in those countries you find people that are oppressed, dissidents that are being jailed or imprisoned. You find democratic methods or techniques are almost non-existent. Torture, killing, and imprisonment are commonplace. And in most cases in these countries, there's already a resistance movement of some type going on. But in the case of the Middle East countries, I become quite concerned, because when you look at the Middle East countries, there is this fundamentalist or radical element that is present in almost every one of the countries. And it is an opportunity that the current regime in Iran sees to make a change in control of that country that will allow them to control the region. And so when I look at what's going on in Egypt today, I know there are elements of the media that are very positive and very upbeat. All of us are excited about the Egyptian people now being out from under what turns out to be a very oppressive leader. But at the same time, I think we have to be concerned. And I, for one, am concerned about what the future holds. I'm a little more reserved in the media for the following reason. Not all countries, I think, can use the same template that we saw in Egypt, because in Egypt, the people with the guns, the armed forces, the army, if you will, to get specific, were very supportive of the people. They were a very highly respected institution in Egypt, and still are. And they were determined that that they would support those that were opposing the regime by gunning them down like the Iranian government does today. Now, from my perspective, the Iranian people could not be worse off than they are with the current Iranian regime. Today, Iran suffers from a regime that is a mixture of theocracy and autocracy, and one that continues to defy the international community. I believe that the Iranian people, both those that are inside the country today as well as those that are living in exile or outside the country, are in favor of change, and not tomorrow, but today. There's one exception, and it's a big exception. And those are the people in Iran that are armed, the ones that are in control, the ones that enjoy being in control and do not want to see a change in government, because they are the ones that are treated well. They are the ones that benefit from the current regime. And that is where we see an issue. Iran's issue is compounded by the fact that the largest organized resistance to Iran's current regime has been put on the FTO list, the MEK. That creates a tremendous issue for making that change. Now, right here, distinguished Ambassador Dale Daly, when he was serving, when he was in office, recommended that they be taken off. His recommendation was not followed, which in my opinion was a mistake, and one that we should rectify immediately. Not tomorrow, today. Ambassador Dale Daly was dead on target then. He's dead on target today. We need to move. Iran's current regime is the largest exporter of state-sponsored terrorism in the world. U.S. forces have encountered their opposition groups every place we've been in for the last 25 years. Our friends and allies in the Middle East fear the current Iranian regime. And I saw that on every trip that I made, and still with those that I correspond with in the Middle East. Yet, by placing the MEK on the FTO list, we have weakened the support of the best organized internal resistance group to the most terrorist-oriented, anti-Western world, anti-democratic regime in the region. That's a disgrace. On top of that, we stood by as the Iraqis invaded Camp Ashraf, as has been talked about several times, as they killed unarmed civilians, Iranian civilians living there, individuals that had been promised protection by the United States. Iran's current regime is clearly a government that needs to change. The MEK is the organization that they fear, and that should tell us something right off the bat. But when you look at what the MEK stands for, when their anti-nuclear stance, from the separation of church and state, from individual rights, MEK is obviously the way that Iran needs to go. Why we haven't joined our friends, our European allies, along with our great partner there, the United Kingdom, and taken them off the list is beyond me. You know, I know they were placed, the MEK was placed there on the list based on hope. Hope that by declaring the MEK an FTO, we would endear ourselves to the current Iranian regime and therefore allow us to work more closely with that regime. It was a noble attempt, but one that did not pan out. Our European allies saw that it didn't pan out, and they moved quickly to take them off the list. You know, I believe we've got a great Secretary of State in Secretary Hillary Clinton. But for those below her in the State Department, those that make the recommendations that come up to the Secretary, I say, who are we kidding? Get on with it. Get the recommendation to the Secretary and let's take action. The MEK is not a perfect organization. They've made mistakes. So have we. But I think the MEK, when you look at them in the big picture, they provide hope for the Iranian people that far exceeds anything that we or our allies can offer, excluding direct intervention at this point. I think for those of us gathered here today, and I can tell you I'm truly honored to be a member of this group today, our prayer is that we will see democracy prevail in Iran and in the Middle East, but in such a manner that it will provide peace and stability, and that we can maintain that throughout the region. And our hope is that the MEF will be removed from the FTO list and allowed to continue their efforts to bring about change in Iran for the sake of the Iranian people. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. It is very unusual in a Senate hearing to actually have two Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff of the United States, but that indeed is what we have here today. General Peter Pace was sworn in as the 16th Chairman of the Joint Chiefs in 2005. This is the culmination of a career that began as a graduate of the United States Naval Academy. He served as the principal military advisor to the President, the Secretary of Defense, and the National Security Council. Prior to becoming chairman, he served as the vice chairman of the Joint Chiefs from 2001 to 2005. General Pace holds the distinction of being the first Marine to have served in either of these positions. He's also served as Commander-in-Chief of the United States Southern Command.
Thank you. Thank you. I truly am honored to be here with you, to be part of this panel with so many folks who I've had the pleasure of serving with and who I admire, but mostly because of you here in this room. I came as an individual who has had some unique experiences, and I hope that my experience can somehow help us all understand better how to help Iran. But like you, like each and every one of you, the overriding reason to be here this morning for each of us is our passionate desire to see the Iranian people live their lives the way they want to, in freedom. I've been asked to speak to you a little bit about the threat that Iran currently is and the potential responses to that threat. First, it'd be good if we define what a threat is. In military terms, it is a capability to do you harm, and number two, an intent to do it. And countries over time have changed, as I believe Iran will. Is the current regime in Iran a threat? Absolutely. Look in the region. They provide weapons and instruction and sometimes personnel in Iraq and Afghanistan, specifically to make it difficult for the governments in both of those countries to grow their democracies, specifically to kill Americans and our coalition partners, specifically to impose their will on their neighbors. Their special operations forces and their support for Hezbollah in Lebanon just makes that tortured region so much more difficult to live in and so much more difficult to find a peaceful solution. Their conventional forces, the hundreds of small, fast attack boats that can do swarm tactics against both commercial and military vessels in the Gulf and in the Strait of Hormuz. Their many missiles, both cruise missiles and the 2,000 plus missiles that they have, some of which that can travel 2,000 plus kilometers, are all threats to their neighbors in the region and to those coalition forces from around the globe that are trying to help in the region. In a couple of years, all of Europe will be within a missile range of the missiles they're developing. A couple of years after that, the United States will be in missile range. So there is a very real threat to the region, to Europe, and to the United States in both the current capabilities and the capabilities that are on the drawing board. Couple then missiles that can travel enormous distances with the potential of nuclear weapons, and the threat grows astronomically. Now, as has been mentioned, the advent, the attainment of a nuclear weapon capability by this regime in Iran is truly unacceptable. Can you imagine what they will do? They are already in a position to coerce their neighbors. Can you imagine what their having a nuclear deterrent would do to their willingness to be more adventurous with their armed forces, with their support to paramilitaries, with their support to terrorism? not only is it a problem from the standpoint of that regime having that kind of capability, it then means that the rest of the region has to make a basic decision. Do they cower under that threat? Do they become nuclear powers in their own right? And then what happens when a regime that has shown its willingness to provide money and all sorts of weapons has nuclear weapons that it might give to others, be it other nation states or, worse, terrorist organizations? This is a huge threat to all of us. So what are our possible responses? First, there's the possibility of a military response. It is the least best option, and certainly the last one that we ought to contemplate or use. But if you want to have some ability to talk to the current regime, and if you want to have any credibility, you better have the military capacity and the willingness to use it at the right time. So it's important to also understand that the U.S. military, for one, is quite capable of handling any new threat. Some folks get confused between our desire to not fight and the true strain on our forces that 5 or 6 deployments to Iraq and or Afghanistan has put on them, and on the other hand, our ability to protect ourselves. Today, there are about 200,000, give or take, U.S. service members serving in the Gulf region. That's 200,000 out of 2.4 million active Guard and Reserve. Are they under strain? You bet they are. Have they been working at this for the last 9 or 10 years? Yes, they have. Are they willing to serve their country? Yes, they are. But fundamentally, if a threat rises to the United States of America, does this country have the resiliency and the power to do something about it? The answer is absolutely. There are 2 million plus U.S. service members. There's an entire United States Navy and the entire United States Air Force and all of the other elements of our national power. It would be ugly because we would have to use more brute force, because many of the precision weapons and precision intelligence assets that are needed to be less destructive are already being employed. But no potential enemy should ever misunderstand the difference between ongoing operations and our desire to not overwork our troops and our desire to use the military instrument as a last resort. Should not confuse that with the ability to use it. So the military option on the table is important. It must have credibility, but it is in fact the very last thing you want to use. Next, as you know, is negotiations. The entire Iranian nuclear program has been undertaken during negotiations. It is important to continue to talk, but I don't see where a nation, if it has, that is determined that it will have nuclear weapons, will be dissuaded by negotiations. That leaves why you are all in this room. Uprising of the people. It has been pointed out, Egypt and all of the other public demonstrations that are going on throughout the region right now hold both great promise and great peril. There is no doubt in my mind that the Egyptian people, who have won for themselves this opportunity to rewrite their own constitution, to live in freedom the way that they want to inside their own country, there's no doubt in my mind that there are forces out there, including current Iranian regime forces, that would seek to steal that program from them. It has been pointed out also, the Egyptian armed forces and the Egyptian police have been supportive and not suppressive of the true will of the Egyptian people. Different story in Tehran. So it is gatherings like this that are so important. I know the issue of the MEK is critical to each of you. I tried to understand, when I knew I was going to be part of this panel today, why is it that my government continues to list the MEK as a terrorist organization? I have not found the reason that convinces me. The 10 points that were read today are wonderful. I would support each of those 10 points if I were an Iranian citizen. And I certainly do as a citizen of the world. Some folks said to me this week, well, if the United States government took the MEK off the terrorist list, it would be a signal to the Iranian regime that we had changed from a desire to see changes in regime behavior to a desire to see changes in regime. My response to that is, sounds good to me. Lastly, I had the great privilege of wearing the uniform of the Armed Forces of the United States for over 44 years. It was a source of great pride to me to defend my country's Constitution against all enemies, foreign and domestic. And in my life in uniform as best I could to help protect the American people and those of others of like mind around the globe. But I know one thing for a fact, and that is that the freedom I was protecting was freedom I had inherited. Why I truly wanted to be here this morning, why I have such incredible admiration, why I stand in awe of the citizens in Iran today and yesterday and tomorrow, who despite the threat of being killed by their own armed forces or police, who despite the threat of regime punishment, that is handed out so readily. Despite that, they are standing up for the simple reason that they want to live their lives the way that I inherited my life. And as a citizen of the United States, and as a citizen in the world, to be able to come here together with you all and to somehow have our voices be heard in Iran, if we, through our actions today and tomorrow, can help encourage and support those who are fighting for freedom, then has already been pointed out here today, the inevitability of freedom in Iran will come sooner, and that is well worth our time today and tomorrow and every day until it happens.
Thank you, General, very much. I have heard Lee Hamilton introduced to speak on American foreign policy for so many years, on so many occasions. One is put in the position of Liz Taylor's fourth husband, who, when asked about his wedding night, said he knew what to do, he didn't know how to make it interesting. When I came to Congress 28 years ago, Lee Hamilton was already one of the most distinguished voices in American foreign policy. It was my great honor to serve with him as he became the chairman of the House Foreign Affairs Committee. But that was only part of his distinguished service. He served in the Congress from 1965 to 1999. He is a member of the President's Foreign Intelligence Advisory Board and the President's Homeland Security Advisory Council. He was co-chairman, along with Secretary of State James Baker, of the Iraq Study Group, a bipartisan panel created at the urging of Congress in December 2006 to make recommendations on American policy towards Iraq. At a perilous moment in American history, after the 9/11 attacks, he was called upon again to become Vice Chairman of the National Commission on Terrorist Attacks, which issued its report in July 2004. Lee Hamilton also served from 1999 to 2010 as the President and Director of the Woodrow Wilson International Center for Scholars in Washington, D.C., a distinguished American and a great friend, Lee Hamilton.
First of all, to be with this very distinguished panel. I think I've worked with all of them, and I know I've heard testimony from all of them. What impresses me about the people here at the panel this morning, that they are people who have tried to make this country work. They are dedicated public servants, and it's a high honor for me to be with them. Secondly, I'm honored to be here because of you. I admire what you have stood for in terms of seeking for the Iranian people freedom. I know many of you have deep personal attachments to people today in Iran, that you feel the issues that we discuss here rather easily. You feel them very, very deeply. Now, my impressions are, first, the United States has had extraordinary difficulty over a period of decades of dealing with this country of Iran. It has created enormous tensions in the international community over a period of time. And of course, all the world today is very much focused on what it's planning to do with regard to nuclear materials. I've read, as you have read in recent days, the intelligence reports of the United States government. Maybe others here on this platform that can speak to that better than I. But I'm impressed when they say that Iran is determined to build a nuclear program and that they have begun taking steps towards designing nuclear warheads. May I make a few suggestions? We must insist, of course, that the Iraq government live up to its commitment to protect those who live in Ashraf. I've talked with several of you in recent days about that situation. You have educated me a good bit on what has gone on there. But the safety and security of those people must be assured, and the United States must insist upon it. Secondly, as I think all of us would agree, we have to support and we have to tighten the sanctions. We have had sanctions on Iran since 1979, and the world community a long time as well. Loopholes have to be closed. The sanctions have to be tightened. From my point of view, I think it's very important that we particularly tighten those sanctions with regard to financial flows and financial institutions. The next thing we have to do, of course, is to support the opposition in Iran. I have been terribly moved, as you have been, as I have seen the protest movements spreading now across the Middle East. And I am very much aware of the fact that in Iran, in the next 2 or 3 days, it could be a very critical time for the future of that country. The United States must see this as an opportunity to stand up for our core values in this country. And we must support those people in Iran who seek freedom and democracy and respect for human rights. I believe the best chance for the United States to move forward in its relationship with Iran is to support the opposition in Iran. And of course, we should never let up on our support for human rights. I believe that the United States understands that the ingredients in Iran today are there for the support of change. They have a frustrated, young, well-educated, not employed, technically savvy, restless group of people in that country. Change will come to Iran. It is only a matter of time. Let me talk about this issue of delisting the MEK. I do not understand why the United States has kept the MEK on the terrorist list for all of these years. I have had access to classified information. This is a factual question with regard to the conduct of the MEK. And why the United States has not resolved it and spoken out on it, I simply do not understand. But I am not aware of any facts that require the MEK to be on the terrorist list. Now, as I conclude here, I want to just say a word about this 10-point plan. As I understand it, this is the third option. I've read through that. I like it. I think it's very well done. Support for the ballot box, support for a pluralist system, separation of the church and state, complete gender equality, a modern legal system, support for the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, support for private property, support for peaceful coexistence, support for a free Iran. Thank you.
ادامه کنفرانس